The blood on Victoria Zimmer's hands would not wash away no matter how hard she scrubbed them in the creek water, though it had been 3 days since she pulled the trigger that saved her life and ended her husband's. She knelt by the shallow water outside Lordsburg, New Mexico, in the summer heat of 1878, knowing that the law might not see it as self-defense, even though Frank Zimmer had been beating her senseless when she grabbed his pistol from the bedside table. The bruises on her face told one story, but the fact that she had shot him twice in the chest while he slept afterward told another. And that was the truth that would hang her if anyone ever found out what really happened in that ranch house 20 miles north of town. She had told the sheriff that Frank went to Santa Fe on business, would be gone a month or more, and she hoped that by the time anyone found his body buried in the root cellar, she would be long gone from New Mexico territory. But running required money, and money required work, and work in a small town like Lordsburg required questions she could not answer. Victoria had sold what little jewelry she owned, packed her few belongings into a worn carpet bag, and taken a room above the saloon under her maiden name, Victoria Zeller, hoping the slight change would be enough to keep anyone from connecting her to Frank Zimmer's missing wife. The saloon owner, a heavy-set woman named Marjorie, had looked at the bruises on Victoria's face and asked no questions when she inquired about work. Within 2 days, Victoria was serving drinks to cowboys, miners, and drifters who passed through Lordsburg on their way to somewhere better. She kept her head down, spoke little, and saved every cent she earned, planning to buy passage on a stage heading west to California where she could disappear into a city and start fresh. That plan lasted exactly 8 days, until Dalton Xavier walked into the saloon on a Saturday night with dust on his boots and a gentle smile that seemed out of place in a room full of rough men. He was tall, lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of sun-warmed honey. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, simple and practical, and he removed his hat when he stepped inside, revealing a sunburned face that looked honest in a way Victoria had almost forgotten men could look. He took a seat at a corner table, away from the rowdy poker game and the piano player who pounded out discordant melodies, and when Victoria approached to take his order, he looked up at her with an expression of such open kindness that she almost dropped her serving tray. "Evening, madam," he said quietly. "Just a whiskey, if you please." Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice, and returned to the bar to pour his drink. Her hands shook slightly as she carried the glass back to his table, and she could feel his eyes on her face, taking in the fading bruises that no amount of powder could fully hide. "Thank you," he said when she set the glass before him. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he added, "I hope you do not think me forward, madam, but if you are in some kind of trouble, there are good people in this town who would help you." Victoria felt her throat tighten. "I am managing just fine, thank you." "I am sure you are," Dalton said gently. "But managing and being safe are not always the same thing." She wanted to tell him to mind his own business, wanted to walk away and forget the concern in his voice, but something about the way he spoke, without judgment or expectation, made her pause. "What makes you think I am not safe?" "A woman does not get bruises like those from being safe," Dalton replied, his voice so low that only she could hear. "And she does not have the look in her eyes that you have got from being at peace." Victoria swallowed hard. "You do not know anything about me." "No, madam, I do not," he agreed. "But I know something about running, and I know something about being afraid. I have been both at different times." He took a sip of his whiskey and then looked at her again. "My name is Dalton Xavier. I work on the Rockingham Ranch about 5 miles east of here. If you ever need help, for any reason, you can find me there." Before Victoria could respond, another customer called for service, and she hurried away, her heart pounding against her ribs. She did not speak to Dalton again that night, though she felt his presence in the saloon like a steady flame, warm and constant. When he left an hour later, he placed coins on the table that included a generous tip, touched the brim of his hat to her in farewell, and walked out into the night. Victoria told herself to forget him. She told herself that kindness from a stranger meant nothing, that she could trust no one, that her only hope lay in saving enough money to leave Lordsburg forever. But 3 days later, when Dalton returned to the saloon and took the same corner table, she felt an unwelcome flutter of anticipation that she tried desperately to suppress. This time, their conversation was longer. Dalton told her about the ranch where he worked, about the cattle drives and the hard but honest labor of cowboy life. He spoke of growing up in Texas, of losing his parents to fever when he was 16, of drifting through various territories before settling in New Mexico. His voice held no bitterness, only a kind of quiet acceptance that Victoria found strangely comforting. "What brought you to Lordsburg?" he asked her, and Victoria felt the familiar panic rise in her chest. "Family troubles," she said, which was not entirely a lie. "I needed a fresh start." Dalton nodded, asking nothing further. "Fresh starts are hard but necessary sometimes. I hope you find what you are looking for here." "I do not plan to stay long," Victoria admitted. "Just until I can save enough to go west." "California," Dalton guessed, and when she nodded, he smiled slightly. "It is beautiful country from what I hear. Milder weather opportunities, but it is also full of people running from something. Eventually, the past catches up, no matter how far you go." His words struck Victoria like a physical blow, and she stood abruptly. "I should get back to work." "Of course," Dalton said. "I did not mean to upset you." But upset she was, because his words held a truth she had been trying to avoid. Running would not erase what she had done, would not wash Frank's blood from her conscience, would not give her peace. Yet what other choice did she have? Over the following weeks, Dalton became a regular at the saloon, always polite, always respectful, never drinking more than a single whiskey. He spoke to Victoria when she served him but never monopolized her time or made her uncomfortable. Other men in the saloon grew bolder with their attention, making crude comments or reaching for her as she passed. But Dalton only watched with quiet disapproval. And twice, he intervened when customers became too insistent, his calm authority diffusing situations that could have turned ugly. Victoria found herself looking for him when the saloon doors opened, found herself disappointed on the evenings he did not appear. She told herself it was foolish to develop any kind of attachment, that she would be leaving soon, and that getting close to anyone was dangerous. But loneliness was its own kind of danger, and Dalton's steady presence began to feel like an anchor in a world where Victoria felt perpetually adrift. It was on a warm evening in late August when everything changed. Victoria was walking back to her room above the saloon after visiting the general store when she saw a man on horseback at the far end of the street, a man whose silhouette made her blood run cold. He was too far away for her to see his face clearly, but something about the way he sat his horse, the angle of his shoulders, reminded her viscerally of Frank. She froze, her heart hammering, her breath coming in short gasps. Logically, she knew it could not be Frank because Frank was dead and buried in a root cellar 20 miles away. But panic was not logical, and Victoria found herself unable to move, unable to think, trapped in a moment of pure terror. "Victoria." Dalton's voice cut through the fog of fear, and she turned to see him approaching from the direction of the livery stable. "What is wrong?" She could not speak, could only shake her head, her eyes still fixed on the distant rider who was now turning his horse and riding away, disappearing around a corner. Dalton followed her gaze, then looked back at her with concern. "Do you know that man?" "No," Victoria managed. "I thought I did, but no." He studied her face for a moment, and she saw understanding dawn in his expression. "The person who hurt you, you thought that was him." It was not a question, and Victoria saw no point in denying it. She nodded mutely. "Come with me," Dalton said gently, offering his arm. "Let us get you somewhere safe." He guided her to a small cafe down the street, settling her at a table in the back corner where she could see the door but would not be easily visible from the street. He ordered coffee for both of them, and they sat in silence while Victoria's breathing slowly returned to normal. "I am sorry," she said finally. "I do not know what came over me." "You do not need to apologize," Dalton replied. "Fear is nothing to be ashamed of, especially when it is earned." Victoria wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup, drawing comfort from its heat. "You must think me ridiculous." "I think you are brave," Dalton said, his voice firm. "It takes courage to leave a bad situation, to start over. Many people never find that strength." His words brought tears to Victoria's eyes, tears she had been holding back for weeks. "You do not understand," she whispered. "I am not brave. I am a coward, and I am running because I have done something terrible." Dalton leaned forward, his expression serious but not unkind. "Whatever you have done, I doubt it was without cause." "How can you say that?" Victoria asked, her voice breaking. "You do not know what I am capable of. I know that you are kind to the other girls at the saloon, that you help old Mrs. Henderson carry her groceries even though she never tips you, that you saved your bread from dinner last week to feed the stray dog behind the building," Dalton said quietly. "I know that you flinch when men raise their voices, that you have nightmares because I have seen you walking the streets at dawn when you cannot sleep, that you carry sadness in your eyes that no one your age should have to carry. Whatever you did, Victoria, I know it was not done out of cruelty." His perception undid her. Victoria felt the tears spill over, hot and fast, and she covered her face with her hands, ashamed to be crying in public but unable to stop. She felt Dalton's hand cover hers, warm and solid, and heard him call for the cafe owner to bring a private room if one was available. Minutes later, they were in a small back room used for private dining, and Victoria sat on a wooden bench while Dalton pulled up a chair and waited patiently for her to compose herself. "I killed my husband," she said finally, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "Frank Zimmer. We had a ranch north of here. He used to beat me, and one night it got so bad that I thought he was going to kill me. I grabbed his gun and shot him while he slept. Then I buried him in the root cellar and told everyone he went to Santa Fe." She waited for Dalton's expression to change, for him to recoil in horror or stand up and call for the sheriff. Instead, he simply nodded slowly, his hand still covering hers. "Does anyone else know?" he asked. "No," Victoria whispered. "Just you." "Why did you tell me?" She looked at him then, really looked at him, at the honest face and kind eyes and the way he held himself like a man who could be trusted. "Because I am tired of lying," she said. "Because you have been nothing but decent to me, and you deserve to know the truth. Because I do not want you to waste any more kindness on someone like me." "Someone like you," Dalton repeated, his voice thoughtful. "You mean someone who defended herself against a man who was beating her. Someone who survived when she should have been killed. Victoria, what you did was not murder. It was survival. The law will not see it that way," she said bitterly. "Especially not after I buried him and lied about where he went." "Maybe not," Dalton agreed, "but that does not make you a bad person. It makes you a desperate one." Victoria pulled her hand away from his. "You should stay away from me, Dalton. If anyone finds out what I did, Anyone who associates with me will be tainted by association. I will only bring you shame." Dalton was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was steady and sure. "Then we will face it side by side." Victoria stared at him in disbelief. "Did you hear what I just said? I am a murderer. I am wanted, even if they do not know it yet. I have brought nothing but trouble, and I will continue to bring nothing but trouble. You do not want to be anywhere near me when this all comes crashing down." "I heard exactly what you said," Dalton replied, leaning forward so his eyes were level with hers. "And I am telling you that I do not care. Whatever trouble comes, Victoria, we will face it together." "Why?" she demanded, anger and confusion and desperate hope warring in her chest. "Why would you risk everything for someone you barely know?" "Because I see you," Dalton said simply. "Not the scared woman serving drinks in a saloon, not the wife who shot her abusive husband, but you. The real you, underneath all the fear and shame. And that person is worth standing beside, no matter what comes." Victoria felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked tight since the night she pulled that trigger. "I do not deserve this," she whispered. "I do not deserve you." "Maybe," Dalton said with a slight smile, "but you are stuck with me anyway." Despite everything, Victoria laughed, a short, watery sound that was part sob and part genuine amusement. "You are insane." "Probably," he agreed, "but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." They sat in that small room for another hour, talking in low voices about Victoria's marriage, about the years of abuse she had endured, about the night everything came to an end. Dalton listened without judgment, his presence a steady comfort, and when Victoria finally ran out of words, he helped her back to the saloon and made her promise to meet him the next day. "We need to figure out what to do," he told her. "Running is not the answer, Victoria. Neither is living in fear, waiting for the past to catch up. There has to be another way." Victoria wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that there was a path forward that did not involve constantly looking over her shoulder, but years of Frank's cruelty had taught her that hope was dangerous. Still, as she climbed the stairs to her small room above the saloon, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, something that might have been the beginning of trust. True to his word, Dalton met her the next afternoon at the cafe. He had spent the morning thinking, he told her, and he believed there was a way to resolve her situation that did not involve her hanging or going to prison. "The key is documentation," he explained. "If we can prove that Frank was abusive, that he threatened your life, then what you did becomes self-defense." "But I shot him while he slept," Victoria reminded him. "How is that self-defense?" "Because you were in fear for your life," Dalton said. "Because you had been beaten so badly that night that you could not see straight, and you knew that if you waited until he woke up, he might kill you before you could defend yourself. Any reasonable person would understand that." "The sheriff is not what I would call reasonable," Victoria said darkly. "Then we do not go to the sheriff here," Dalton replied. "We go to the territorial marshal in Santa Fe. We present your case to someone who has the authority to investigate properly, who can see the evidence and make a fair judgment." Victoria felt her stomach clench with fear. "What evidence? It has been almost 2 months. The bruises are gone. There is nothing to prove what he did to me." "There is your testimony," Dalton said. "There is the fact that everyone in the area knows Frank Zimmer was a hard man with a terrible temper. There are likely neighbors who heard fighting, who saw you with injuries. And there is the fact that you came forward voluntarily to explain what happened, rather than continuing to hide." "I did not come forward," Victoria pointed out. "I only told you. And I am asking you to let me help you come forward properly," Dalton said. "Victoria, you cannot live like this forever. Even if you make it to California, even if you change your name and hide, the fear will follow you. The guilt will eat at you. You will never be free." She knew he was right, but the thought of voluntarily confessing to what she had done, of putting herself at the mercy of the law, terrified her beyond reason. "They will hang me," she said flatly. "No matter what evidence we present, no matter what anyone says, I will hang for killing my husband." "You might," Dalton admitted, and she appreciated his honesty even as it made her want to run screaming from the cafe. "But you also might not. And even if the worst happens, at least you will have faced it with your head high, knowing you told the truth. That is supposed to be comforting." Victoria asked, her voice sharp with fear. "No," Dalton said, "but it is supposed to be a choice. Right now you have no choices, Victoria. You are trapped by your secret, ruled by your fear. If you come forward, if you tell the truth, you take back control of your own story." Victoria was silent for a long moment, turning his words over in her mind. She had not felt in control of anything since the day she married Frank Zimmer at 18, a naive girl who thought she was getting a respectable husband and a secure future. 5 years of marriage had stripped away her naivety and nearly stripped away her life. The night she killed Frank, she had been acting purely on instinct, on the animal need to survive. But perhaps Dalton was right. Perhaps it was time to stop surviving and start living. "If I do this," she said slowly, "if I go to Santa Fe and confess, you cannot come with me. I will not let you be associated with this." "I am already associated," Dalton replied. "You told me what happened, which makes me complicit if I say nothing. Besides, I have no intention of letting you face this alone." "Dalton, please," Victoria said, reaching across the table to grip his hand. "You are risking too much. Your job, your reputation, maybe even your freedom. I cannot let you throw away your life for me." "You are not letting me do anything," he said firmly. "I am making my own choice, same as you, and I choose to stand with you." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes again. "I told you I would only bring you shame." "Then we will face it side by side," Dalton repeated, his voice gentle but unyielding. "How many times do I need to say it before you believe me?" "At least 100 more," Victoria said, managing a weak smile through her tears. "Then I had better get started," Dalton replied, and the warmth in his voice made Victoria's heart ache with something that felt dangerously close to love. They spent the next week preparing for the journey to Santa Fe. Dalton spoke to his boss at the Rockingham Ranch, explaining that he needed time away for personal business. The ranch owner, a fair man named Matthew Carlson, agreed to give Dalton 2 weeks, though he made it clear that he expected him back to help with the fall roundup. Victoria gave notice at the saloon, telling Marjorie only that she had to take care of some family matters. The older woman looked at her with knowing eyes but asked no questions, pressing $2 silver into Victoria's hand as a parting gift and telling her to take care of herself. During those days of preparation, Victoria and Dalton spent long hours together, and Victoria found herself opening up to him in ways she had never opened up to anyone. She told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her parents who died of cholera when she was 15, about the aunt who took her in, and then married her off to Frank Zimmer 2 years later to rid herself of the financial burden. Dalton, in turn, told her about his own losses, about the loneliness of drifting through life without family or real connections, about the way he had learned to be self-sufficient, but had never stopped hoping for something more. "I thought I would spend my whole life alone," he admitted one evening as they walked along the edge of town, watching the sun set over the desert in streaks of orange and purple. "I thought maybe I was not meant for the kind of connection other people have, that something in me was broken. But then I met you, and I realized I had just been waiting." Waiting for a woman wanted for murder, Victoria asked, trying for levity but hearing the vulnerability in her own voice. Waiting for someone real, Dalton corrected. Someone who had been through hell and come out the other side still fighting. Someone brave enough to face the truth, even when it terrifies her. I am not brave, Victoria protested. I am scared out of my mind. Courage is not the absence of fear, Dalton said, stopping to face her. It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear. You are the bravest person I have ever met, Victoria. She looked up at him, at the honest face and steady eyes, and felt something shift in her chest. On impulse, she rose on her toes and kissed him, a brief press of lips that was over almost before it began. When she pulled back, Dalton was staring at her with an expression of wonder. "What was that for?" he asked softly. "For being you," Victoria said simply. "For standing beside me when anyone sensible would run the other direction. For making me feel like maybe I am worth saving after all." Dalton cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "You are worth everything," he said. And then he kissed her again, deeper this time, a kiss that spoke of promise and possibility and a future Victoria had not dared to imagine. They held each other as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and the stars began to emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. And for the first time in years, Victoria felt something other than fear. She felt hope. The journey to Santa Fe began on a clear morning in early September. Dalton borrowed horses from the Rockingham Ranch, and they set out north with enough supplies for the several days of travel ahead. Victoria had never been to Santa Fe, and under different circumstances, she might have enjoyed the journey through the high desert landscape, the way the mountains rose in the distance, the surprising patches of green where water collected. But anxiety rode with her every mile, a constant presence that made her stomach churn and her hands tremble on the reins. She kept imagining what would happen when they reached Santa Fe, when she confessed to the territorial marshal. Would she be arrested immediately, thrown in jail? Would Dalton be implicated as an accessory after the fact? Dalton seemed to sense her spiraling thoughts because he kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks, telling stories about previous trips through this territory, asking her opinion on everything from the best way to break a stubborn horse to whether apple or cherry pie was superior. "You are trying to distract me," Victoria said on the second day when Dalton launched into an elaborate debate about the merits of different saddle styles. "Is it working?" he asked with a slight smile. "A little," she admitted. Then, more seriously, "Thank you. I do not know what I would do without you." "You would manage," Dalton said. "You are stronger than you know, but I am glad you do not have to do it alone." They made camp that night beside a small creek, the water gurgling peacefully over smooth stones. Dalton built a fire and cooked beans and bacon while Victoria tended to the horses, and they ate in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and filled with stars. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said after a while. "Anything," Dalton replied. "Why did you really decide to help me? And please do not say it is because you see something in me or because you are a good person. There has to be more to it than that." Dalton was quiet for a moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "My mother," he said finally. "Before the fever took her, she was married to my father, and he was not a kind man. He did not beat her the way your husband beat you, but he was cruel in other ways. He controlled every aspect of her life, made her feel small and worthless. When he died, I was 12. And I remember seeing my mother smile for the first time in years. Really smile like a weight had been lifted." He looked up at Victoria, the firelight casting shadows on his face. She only had 4 good years before the fever took her, but those 4 years were happy. She became herself again, the person she was meant to be before my father crushed her spirit. When I met you, when I saw the fear and sadness in your eyes, I saw my mother. And I thought maybe, if I could help you, it would be like giving her the help she deserved and never got. Victoria felt her throat tighten with emotion. I am sorry you went through that. I am sorry you went through worse, Dalton replied. But we both survived, and that has to count for something. It does, Victoria agreed. It counts for everything. That night, they spread their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, maintaining propriety even though they were alone in the wilderness. But Victoria found herself unable to sleep, staring up at the stars and thinking about what awaited them in Santa Fe. Eventually, she heard Dalton moving, and then he was beside her, settling his bedroll next to hers. I thought you might want some company, he said quietly. I do, Victoria admitted, and they lay side by side, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth, hear his breathing steady and calm. Gradually, her own breathing matched his rhythm, and she felt herself relaxing, the fear receding enough that sleep became possible. Just before she drifted off, she felt Dalton's hand find hers in the darkness, their fingers intertwining, and she held on like he was the only solid thing in a world gone uncertain. They reached Santa Fe on the 4th day of travel, dusty and tired but determined. The territorial capital was larger than Lordsburg, bustling with activity and commerce. Adobe buildings lined the streets, and the plaza at the center of town was crowded with vendors selling everything from woven blankets to fresh produce. Dalton led them to a modest hotel where they took separate rooms, and Victoria washed away the trail dust before changing into her cleanest dress. She looked at herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked older than her 23 years, worn down by hardship, but there was also something new in her eyes, a kind of determination that had not been there before. Dalton knocked on her door an hour later, looking equally clean and considerably more nervous than she had ever seen him. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," Victoria said honestly, "but I do not think I ever will be, so we might as well go now." The territorial marshal's office was a squat building near the plaza, and the man behind the desk when they entered was in his 50s, with gray threading through his dark hair and a weathered face that suggested years spent outdoors. He looked up as they approached, his expression neutral but not unkind. "Help you folks?" he asked. Victoria opened her mouth to speak but found no words would come. Her throat had gone dry, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Dalton squeezed her hand once, then addressed the marshal. "Sir, my name is Dalton Xavier, and this is Victoria Zimmer. We have come from Lordsburg to report a death and to explain the circumstances surrounding it." The marshal's expression sharpened with interest. He gestured to 2 chairs in front of his desk. "Please sit. Tell me what happened." Victoria sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. With Dalton's steady presence beside her, she began to speak. She told the marshal about her marriage to Frank Zimmer, about the years of abuse that escalated over time. She described the beatings, the threats, the way Frank would apologize and promise to change before the cycle repeated. She told him about the night in June when Frank came home drunk and angry, when he beat her so badly that she could taste blood, when she knew with terrible certainty that he would eventually kill her if she did not do something. "I waited until he passed out," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew if I tried to fight him while he was awake, I would not survive, so I took his gun from the bedside table and I shot him while he slept. Twice. Then I buried him in the root cellar and told everyone he had gone to Santa Fe on business. The marshal listened without interrupting, his expression giving nothing away. When Victoria finished, he was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "That is quite a story," he said finally. "Do you have any proof of the abuse you described?" "The bruises are healed now," Victoria said. "But there are neighbors who might have heard fighting. And Frank was known in the area as a difficult man with a bad temper. I am sure people would confirm that." "But they would not confirm that he beat you," the marshal pointed out. "They would only confirm that he had a temper, which is not the same thing." Victoria felt panic rising in her chest. This was exactly what she had feared, that no one would believe her, that her word alone would not be enough. "I believe her," Dalton said firmly. "I have seen how she flinches when people move suddenly, how she startles at raised voices. Those are not the reactions of someone who was in a normal marriage." "And who are you to her?" the marshal asked, turning his attention to Dalton. "Husband, brother." "A friend," Dalton said. "Someone who cares about seeing justice done." "Justice," the marshal repeated thoughtfully. He leaned back in his chair, studying both of them. "Here is my problem. By your own admission, Mrs. Zimmer, you shot your husband while he slept. That is murder, regardless of what led up to it. Self-defense requires an immediate threat, and a man sleeping is not an immediate threat." "He was going to kill me," Victoria said desperately. "Maybe not that night, but soon. I knew it. Every time he beat me, it got worse. It was only a matter of time." "I understand that," the marshal said, and his voice was not unkind. "But the law is not always equipped to handle situations like yours. A woman has a right to defend herself, but she does not have the right to execute her husband, no matter how badly he has treated her." Victoria felt tears streaming down her face. "So what happens now? You arrest me." "I hang," the marshal sighed heavily. "Give me a few days to investigate. I will send someone to Lordsburg to ask around about Frank Zimmer, about your marriage, about what kind of man he was. If what you say is true, if he was as violent and dangerous as you claim, then I may be able to make a case for extenuating circumstances. But I cannot promise anything, Mrs. Zimmer. The truth is that you broke the law and there are consequences for that." "I understand," Victoria whispered. "In the meantime, I will need you to stay in Santa Fe," the marshal continued. "Do not leave town. Do not try to run. If you do, I will issue a warrant for your arrest and you will be treated as a fugitive. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," Victoria said. "And you," the marshal said, turning to Dalton. "I appreciate you bringing her here, but you are not involved in this matter beyond that. I suggest you go back to whatever ranch you work on and let the law handle this from here." "With respect, sir, I am not going anywhere," Dalton said. "Victoria came forward because I convinced her it was the right thing to do. I am not abandoning her now." The marshal looked at Dalton for a long moment, then shook his head. "Young people," he muttered, "always so ready to throw themselves on the fire for each other." But there was a hint of admiration in his voice, and when he dismissed them, he did so with instructions to check back in 3 days for an update on his investigation. Outside the marshal's office, Victoria felt her legs give way, and she would have fallen if Dalton had not caught her. He held her upright, his arms strong and steady around her, and she buried her face against his chest and sobbed with a mixture of relief and terror. "I know," Dalton murmured, one hand stroking her hair. "I know it is terrifying, but you did it, Victoria. You told the truth." "That took more courage than I can say." "What if it is not enough?" she asked through her tears. "What if he investigates and still decides to prosecute me?" "Then we will deal with that when it comes," Dalton said. "One step at a time. Right now you need to rest. You have been carrying this burden for months and you finally set it down. Let yourself feel that." They returned to the hotel, and Victoria collapsed onto her bed, exhausted beyond measure. She slept deeply for the first time since killing Frank, and when she woke, it was evening and Dalton was sitting in a chair by her window, reading by lamplight. "How long have you been here?" she asked groggily. "A few hours," he admitted. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." "You should be resting too," Victoria said, sitting up and pushing her hair back from her face. "I will," Dalton promised. "But first, you should eat something. I had the hotel send up a tray." The food was simple but good, and Victoria found that she was ravenously hungry. They ate together in companionable silence, and afterward Dalton moved to leave, but Victoria caught his hand. "Stay," she said softly. "Please. I do not want to be alone tonight." Dalton hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and desire. "Victoria, your reputation." "What reputation?" she asked with a bitter laugh. "I am a woman who killed her husband. I do not think sharing a room with a man is going to make things any worse." "Still," Dalton said gently, "I do not want to take advantage of you when you are vulnerable." "You are not taking advantage," Victoria insisted. "I am asking you to stay. I am asking you to hold me and make me feel like I am not facing this alone. Please, Dalton." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but I sleep on top of the covers and I keep all my clothes on." "Agreed," Victoria said, and she felt a rush of gratitude so intense it brought fresh tears to her eyes. Dalton settled onto the bed beside her, lying on top of the quilt as promised, and Victoria curled against his side, her head on his shoulder. He wrapped one arm around her, holding her close, and she listened to the steady beat of his heart and felt something in her chest begin to heal. "Dalton," she said after a while. "Yes, I think I am falling in love with you." She felt him tense slightly, then relax. "I think I have been in love with you since the first night I saw you in the saloon," he admitted. "You looked so lost and so brave at the same time, and I knew I would do anything to help you." "Even if it ruins your life?" Victoria asked. "My life was not much before I met you," Dalton said honestly. "I was just drifting, going through the motions. You gave me a purpose, Victoria. You gave me something to fight for. That is not ruin. That is salvation." Victoria lifted her head to look at him, seeing the truth in his eyes. "How did I get so lucky?" she whispered. "I am the lucky one," Dalton replied, and then he kissed her, slow and tender, a kiss that tasted of promise and hope. They lay together through the night, sometimes sleeping, sometimes talking in low voices about everything and nothing. Dalton told her about his dreams of someday owning his own ranch, a small spread where he could raise horses and cattle and build a life that was truly his. Victoria told him about the girl she used to be before Frank, the one who loved reading and gardening and imagining adventures in far-off places. "That girl is still there," Dalton assured her. "She has just been buried under years of survival. But she is still there, Victoria, and she can come out again." "I hope you are right," Victoria said. "I want to be her again, or at least some version of her who is older and wiser and stronger." "You already are," Dalton said. "You just need to give yourself permission to believe it." The next 3 days passed in a strange limbo. Victoria and Dalton explored Santa Fe together, walking through the plaza and visiting the old mission churches, eating at small cafes and pretending for brief moments that they were just a normal couple enjoying a trip to the city. But the weight of the upcoming meeting with the marshal hung over everything, a constant reminder that Victoria's future remained uncertain. On the third day, they returned to the marshal's office. The same gray-haired man sat behind the desk, but this time his expression was more thoughtful than neutral. "I sent my deputy to Lordsburg to ask around about Frank Zimmer," he said without preamble. "He talked to your neighbors, to people in town, to anyone who knew your husband." The picture that emerged was not a pretty one. Victoria held her breath, barely daring to hope. Apparently, Frank Zimmer was known for his temper and his drinking, the marshal continued. Multiple people reported hearing shouting and sounds of violence coming from your ranch. One neighbor, a Mrs. Adelaide Porter, said she saw you in town once with a black eye and split lip, and when she asked what happened, you told her you fell. But she did not believe you. I remember that day, Victoria said quietly. Mrs. Porter gave me some salve for the bruising and told me I could come stay with her if I ever needed to. But I was too afraid of what Frank would do if I left. The marshal nodded. My deputy also found the ranch and examined it. He found your husband's body exactly where you said it would be, in the root cellar. The coroner has confirmed that he died from 2 gunshot wounds to the chest, just as you described. So what does that mean? Dalton asked, his hand finding Victoria's and holding tight. It means, the marshal said slowly, that I believe Mrs. Zimmer was telling the truth about the abuse she suffered. It also means that I understand why she felt she had no choice but to take the action she did. However, the law is still the law. She killed her husband, and that cannot go unpunished. Victoria felt her stomach drop. So I am going to hang. No, the marshal said, and Victoria's head snapped up in surprise. I am not going to charge you with murder, Mrs. Zimmer. What I am going to do is charge you with manslaughter under extenuating circumstances, with a recommendation to the territorial judge that your sentence be time served plus community service. Time served, Victoria repeated, not quite believing what she was hearing. The 3 months you have been living in fear, looking over your shoulder, carrying the weight of what you did, that is your time served, the marshal explained. As for community service, I am recommending that you spend 1 year working with an organization here in Santa Fe that helps women in difficult domestic situations. You can teach them what you learned, help them find ways out before they reach the point you reached. Turn your experience into something that might save other lives. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. You are not going to arrest me. I am going to file the official paperwork, which means there will be a record of what happened, the marshal said. But unless the judge overrules my recommendation, which I doubt he will, you will be free to live your life. With the understanding that you can never do something like this again, and that you have a responsibility to use your second chance wisely. I will, Victoria promised fervently. I swear I will. Good, the marshal said. Now get out of my office, both of you. I have real criminals to deal with. Outside, in the bright Santa Fe sunshine, Victoria turned to Dalton and threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. I cannot believe it, she said. I thought for sure I was going to hang. You are free, Dalton said, holding her tight. You are finally free, Victoria. We are free, she corrected. Because I could not have done this without you. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the middle of the street while people passed around them. Finally, Victoria pulled back and looked up at Dalton's face. What do we do now? She asked. Now, Dalton said, a smile spreading across his face. Now we start living, really living, not just surviving. I would like that, Victoria said softly. I would like that very much. They spent 2 more weeks in Santa Fe while Victoria met with the judge and completed the formal proceedings for her case. The judge, an older man with kind eyes, listened to her story and agreed with the marshal's recommendation. He officially sentenced her to time served plus 1 year of community service, working with the newly formed Women's Aid Society of Santa Fe. The organization was run by a formidable woman named Margaret Holmes, who had herself escaped an abusive marriage years earlier, and now dedicated her life to helping other women do the same. She welcomed Victoria with open arms, assigning her to help with counseling, fundraising, and the practical work of providing shelter and resources to women fleeing dangerous situations. "You have been given a rare gift," Margaret told Victoria during their first meeting. "The gift of a second chance. Many women in your situation do not survive, let alone get the opportunity to turn their experience into something positive. Use it well." "I intend to," Victoria promised, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. During those weeks, Victoria and Dalton's relationship deepened into something profound and unshakable. They spent their days exploring Santa Fe, and their evenings talking about the future they wanted to build together. Dalton had to return to Lordsburg briefly to settle his affairs at the Rockingham Ranch, and Victoria found that even a week apart felt unbearable. When he returned, he brought news that he had given notice at the ranch and was looking for work in Santa Fe so they could be together. "I cannot ask you to give up your new life here," he explained. "The work you are doing with the Women's Aid Society is too important, so I will come to you." "You would leave your job for me?" Victoria asked, touched beyond words. "I would leave anything for you," Dalton said simply. "You are my future, Victoria. Everything else is just details." He found work with a freight company that operated out of Santa Fe, hauling goods to various settlements throughout the territory. The pay was decent, and the work allowed him to be in Santa Fe most of the time, with only occasional trips that kept him away for a few days at most. As autumn turned to winter, Victoria and Dalton settled into a rhythm of life together. They rented a small house on the outskirts of Santa Fe, a modest adobe structure with 2 rooms and a tiny courtyard where Victoria planted herbs and vegetables. It was nothing like the ranch house she had shared with Frank, and that was exactly why she loved it. This house was hers and Dalton's, built on love rather than fear, filled with laughter rather than terror. Victoria threw herself into her work with the Women's Aid Society, finding a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. She counseled women who reminded her of herself just months earlier, listened to their stories of abuse and survival, helped them find safe places to stay and ways to support themselves. Some of the women went back to their husbands, unable to break free, and those cases broke Victoria's heart. But others found the courage to start over, and every success felt like a small redemption for her own past. Dalton supported her work in every way he could, attending fundraising events with her, helping repair the building that housed the Women's Aid Society office, even speaking to groups of men about the importance of treating their wives and daughters with respect. He had a gift for reaching people, for making complicated ideas feel simple and true, and Victoria loved watching him use that gift to make the world a little better. On a cold December evening, as they sat by the fire in their small house, Dalton turned to Victoria with a serious expression. "I need to ask you something," he said. "What is it?" Victoria asked, setting down the mending she had been working on. "I love you," Dalton said simply. "I have loved you since the moment I met you, and I will love you until the day I die. I know we have not known each other that long, and I know you have been through hell and might need more time. But I cannot wait any longer to ask. Victoria Zimmer, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Victoria felt her breath catch in her throat. A year ago, the thought of marrying again would have filled her with nothing but terror. But Dalton was not Frank. Dalton was kind and patient and steady, a man who had proven his devotion 100 times over. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Dalton, I will marry you." He pulled a simple silver ring from his pocket, clearly second-hand but polished to a shine, and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and Victoria stared at it through tears of joy. "I am not Frank," Dalton said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "I will never be frank. I will never hurt you, Victoria. I will never make you afraid. I promise you that on my life." "I know," Victoria said, cupping his face in her hands. "I trust you completely, Dalton. You have given me back my life, and I want to spend the rest of it with you." They married in early January of 1879, in a small ceremony at the Mission Church in Santa Fe. Margaret Holmes stood as Victoria's witness, and a cowboy friend of Dalton's from his Rockingham Ranch days stood as his. The priest who performed the ceremony was an elderly man who spoke more Spanish than English, but his blessing over their union felt sincere and binding. Victoria wore a simple blue dress that Margaret had helped her sew, and Dalton wore his best clothes, his dark hair combed back, and his face shining with happiness. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Dalton kissed Victoria with such tenderness that she felt her heart might burst. Afterward, they hosted a small celebration at their house, with friends from the Women's Aid Society and some of Dalton's co-workers from the freight company. It was nothing fancy, just simple food and cheap wine and the kind of warm fellowship that comes from people who genuinely care about each other. But it was perfect, and Victoria found herself laughing more that evening than she had in years. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Dalton made love to Victoria with a gentleness that erased the last lingering shadows of her first marriage. He was patient and attentive, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and when Victoria cried afterward, they were tears of healing rather than pain. "Are you all right?" Dalton asked softly, holding her close. "I am better than all right," Victoria whispered. "I am happy, truly, genuinely happy. I did not think I would ever feel this way again." "You deserve happiness," Dalton said, kissing her forehead. "You deserve everything good this world has to offer." The months that followed were the best of Victoria's life. She completed her year of community service with the Women's Aid Society and was offered a permanent paid position as the organization's assistant director. She accepted gratefully, knowing that this work had become her calling. Dalton continued with the freight company, and they saved money with dreams of eventually buying a small ranch of their own. They talked often about having children, a prospect that both excited and terrified Victoria. The thought of bringing new life into the world, of being responsible for a child's safety and happiness, felt overwhelming after everything she had been through. But Dalton was patient, assuring her that they would wait until she felt ready, that there was no rush. It was in the spring of 1880 that Victoria realized she was pregnant. She had missed 2 monthly cycles and was experiencing bouts of nausea that could not be attributed to anything else. When she told Dalton, he swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." Victoria shared his joy, but she also felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. "What if I am not a good mother?" she asked him that night. "What if I am too damaged from everything with Frank?" "You will be an amazing mother," Dalton said firmly. "You have spent the last 2 years helping women find strength they did not know they had. You have compassion and courage and so much love to give. Our child will be lucky to have you." "And lucky to have you," Victoria added, resting her hand on his chest. "You are going to be a wonderful father, Dalton." The pregnancy was not easy. Victoria suffered from severe morning sickness through the first few months, and the summer heat made her constantly uncomfortable. But Dalton was attentive and supportive, taking on extra household chores, bringing her cool water and whatever foods she could stomach, and telling her stories to distract her when she felt miserable. Margaret Holmes was thrilled by the news and insisted on helping Victoria prepare for the baby's arrival. She organized a gathering where the women of the Aid Society brought handmade clothes, blankets, and other necessities. Victoria was overwhelmed by their generosity, by the way this community of survivors had become her family. In late November, as the first snows began to fall on the mountains surrounding Santa Fe, Victoria went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Victoria was certain she would not survive. But Dalton stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement even when she screamed at him to leave her alone. Finally, just as dawn broke on a cold November morning, Victoria gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The midwife placed him in her arms, this tiny, wrinkled, perfect creature, and Victoria felt a love so fierce and immediate that it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Welcome to the world." Dalton knelt beside the bed, his own eyes wet with tears as he looked at his son. "He is perfect," he said in awe, "absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after Dalton's father, giving him the middle name of William. Thomas William Xavier, a strong name for what Victoria hoped would be a strong and gentle man like his father. The first months of parenthood were exhausting but joyful. Victoria had to reduce her hours at the Women's Aid Society to care for Thomas, but Margaret was understanding and helped arrange a flexible schedule. Dalton doted on his son, waking for midnight feedings and diaper changes without complaint, bouncing Thomas on his knee while telling him stories about the ranch life they would someday have. Victoria found motherhood both harder and more rewarding than she had imagined. There were moments of frustration and exhaustion, times when Thomas cried inconsolably, and she felt helpless. But there were also moments of pure magic, when Thomas would look up at her with his dark eyes, so much like Dalton's, and smile, and Victoria would feel her heart swell with a love she had not known was possible. As Thomas grew from an infant into a chubby, curious toddler, Victoria and Dalton continued building their life together. They saved every spare dollar, and in the spring of 1882, they finally had enough to make a down payment on a small ranch about 10 miles outside Santa Fe. It was nothing fancy, just 40 acres of high desert grassland with a modest house and a barn that needed repairs, but it was theirs. Dalton threw himself into fixing up the property, working long hours to mend fences, repair the barn roof, and build corrals for the horses and cattle they hoped to acquire. Victoria helped when she could, bringing Thomas with her and letting him toddle around the property under her watchful eye. Margaret agreed to let Victoria work primarily from home, handling correspondence and planning for the Aid Society, which allowed her to balance motherhood with the work that still meant so much to her. By the summer of 1882, they had moved into the ranch house permanently. It needed work, but Victoria loved transforming it into a home, hanging curtains she sewed herself, planting a garden in the sunny spot beside the house, filling the rooms with laughter and love. This house held no ghosts, no dark memories, only the promise of a future built on trust and devotion. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Thomas chase butterflies in the tall grass, Dalton turned to Victoria with a contented smile. "Can you believe how far we have come?" he asked. 3 years ago, you were serving drinks in a saloon and running from your past. Now look at us. We have a home, a family, a future. It feels like a dream sometimes," Victoria admitted. "Like I am going to wake up and find out none of this is real." "It is real," Dalton assured her, taking her hand, "and it is only going to get better." He was right. Over the next few years, their ranch prospered modestly but steadily. Dalton proved to have a gift for working with horses, and he began breeding and training them for sale to ranchers and the army. Victoria's work with the Women's Aid Society expanded as well. She organized fundraising events, wrote articles for the local newspaper about domestic violence, and testified before the territorial legislature in support of laws that would better protect women. In 1884, Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in early 1885 she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Victoria's mother. Sarah was a quieter baby than Thomas had been, with Victoria's light brown hair and Dalton's steady temperament. Thomas, now 4 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and appointed himself her protector, always wanting to help feed her or rock her cradle. The ranch house, once too big for just the two of them, now felt comfortably full. Victoria loved the chaos of family life, the noise and laughter and constant activity. There were hard days, of course, days when money was tight or the work seemed endless or the children were cranky and demanding. But even on the hard days, Victoria felt blessed beyond measure. She thought often about the woman she had been in Lordsburg, terrified and alone, believing she had no future worth living for. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from a different lifetime. Victoria had been given the rarest of gifts, a true second chance, and she never took it for granted. The Women's Aid Society continued to thrive, expanding to open satellite offices in other New Mexico towns. Victoria trained volunteers, developed programs, and worked tirelessly to ensure that no woman would ever feel as trapped as she once had. Margaret Holmes eventually retired, and the board asked Victoria to take over as director. She accepted, knowing that this was the work she was meant to do. By 1887, Victoria and Dalton's ranch had become a respected operation in the area. They now had a small herd of cattle in addition to the horses, and Dalton had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work. Thomas, now 6, was already learning to ride and rope, following his father everywhere with absolute adoration. Sarah, at 2, was a spirited toddler who kept Victoria constantly busy. One afternoon in late summer, as Victoria was working in her garden while Sarah played nearby, a wagon pulled up the drive. She stood, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw a woman and 2 small children climbing down. The woman looked exhausted and frightened, her face bruised, her clothes threadbare. "Mrs. Xavier," the woman called hesitantly. "They told me in town that you might be able to help me. I am Martha Reynolds, and I have nowhere else to go." Victoria's heart clenched with familiar recognition. She saw herself in this woman, saw the desperation and fear that she remembered so well. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked forward with a warm smile. "Of course I can help you," she said gently. "You are safe here, Martha. Come inside. Let me get you and your children something to eat, and we can talk about what you need." As she led Martha and her children into the house, Victoria caught sight of Dalton returning from the barn. He took in the scene with understanding eyes and nodded his approval. This was who they were now, people who helped others, who used their hard-won happiness to make the world a little better. That evening, after Martha and her children were settled in the guest room and Sarah and Thomas were asleep, Victoria and Dalton sat on their porch in the cooling night air. The stars were brilliant overhead, the same stars that had witnessed Victoria's darkest moments and now watched over her brightest ones. "You ever think about that night in Lordsburg?" Victoria asked quietly. "When you first told me you would stand beside me no matter what?" "Every day," Dalton admitted. "It was the most important decision I ever made." "I told you I would only bring you shame," Victoria remembered, her voice soft with emotion. "And I told you we would face it side by side," Dalton replied, reaching for her hand. And we did. We faced everything together, and we came out the other side stronger. I love you, Victoria said, the words inadequate for the depth of feeling she carried. I do not think I tell you that enough. You saved my life, Dalton, in every way a person can be saved. You saved mine too, Dalton said, pulling her close. You gave me purpose, family, love. Everything I have, everything I am, I owe to you. They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night and feeling the peace of a life well lived. Inside the house, their children slept safely, and in the guest room, a woman who had been where Victoria once was began the long process of healing. Tomorrow, Victoria would help Martha contact the Women's Aid Society, would help her find work and housing and legal assistance if needed. She would do for Martha what others had done for her, paying forward the kindness and support that had saved her. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. In 1889, Victoria gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Daniel and Grace. The ranch house, once too big, now felt almost too small, but Victoria would not have traded the crowded, chaotic, love-filled space for anything. Thomas grew into a serious, hard-working boy who loved the ranch and wanted nothing more than to follow in his father's footsteps. Sarah was bright and bookish, always with her nose in whatever reading material Victoria could acquire, and already talking about becoming a teacher. The twins were still too young to show their personalities fully, but they brought endless laughter to the household. The Women's Aid Society became a respected institution throughout New Mexico Territory, with Victoria at its helm. She traveled to conferences in other territories and states, sharing what she had learned and bringing back new ideas to implement. She wrote articles and gave speeches, always sharing her own story as an example of how circumstances could change, how women could survive and thrive after escaping abuse. Dalton expanded the ranch over the years, acquiring more land and building their herd. The 2 ranch hands became 4, then 6, as the operation grew. But no matter how busy he was, Dalton always made time for his family, for evenings on the porch with Victoria, for teaching his sons to ride and his daughters to appreciate the beauty of the New Mexico landscape. In 1895, as New Mexico moved closer to statehood and Victoria and Dalton approached their 40s, they sat on that same porch where they had spent so many evenings over the years. Thomas was 15 now, already taller than his father and taking on more responsibility with the ranch. Sarah was 13, with plans to attend the teaching college in Santa Fe. The twins, at 6, were a whirlwind of energy and mischief. "Can you believe it has been 17 years since we met?" Victoria mused, her head resting on Dalton's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Dalton replied. "Other times it feels like you have always been in my life." "I was so broken when you met me," Victoria said softly. "I did not think I would ever be whole again." "You were never broken," Dalton corrected gently. "You were wounded but not broken. There is a difference." "Either way, you healed me," Victoria insisted. "You and the life we built together. You showed me that love does not have to hurt, that family does not have to be a source of fear." "You showed me what love really means," Dalton countered. "Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You taught me how to truly live." Victoria smiled, lifting her head to kiss him softly. After 17 years of marriage, 5 children, countless challenges and triumphs, her love for this man had only deepened. He was her partner in every sense of the word, her greatest supporter, her dearest friend. "What do you think the future holds?" she asked, a question they had asked each other many times over the years. "More of this," Dalton said simply, gesturing to the ranch spread out before them, the house full of children behind them, the endless New Mexico sky above. More family, more work we love, more years of facing whatever comes side by side. That sounds perfect, Victoria agreed. As the sun set over the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been a terrified woman on the run, believing she had no future, no hope, no chance at happiness. But Dalton had seen something in her that she could not see in herself, and he had refused to let her face her demons alone. Together, they had built something beautiful from the ashes of Victoria's past. They had created a family, a home, a life filled with purpose and love. The shame Victoria had feared she would bring to Dalton had never materialized, because there was no shame in survival, no shame in choosing life over death, no shame in accepting help and love when it was offered. In the years that followed, the Xavier family continued to flourish. Thomas took over more of the ranch operations as Dalton gradually stepped back, wanting to spend more time with the younger children and support Victoria's work. Sarah became a teacher, just as she had dreamed, and returned to teach at the school in Lordsburg, bringing her own passion for education to children in the area. The twins followed their own paths, Daniel becoming a veterinarian and Grace joining her mother at the Women's Aid Society, bringing a new generation's perspective to the work of helping women escape violence. Victoria and Dalton grew old together, their faces lined by sun and time but their love undiminished. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their family tree expand and flourish. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through generations, a testament to what could be built from determination, hard work, and unwavering devotion. On a warm summer evening in 1920, Victoria and Dalton sat on their porch for what would be one of the last times. They were both in their 80s now, their bodies aged but their minds still sharp, their hands still intertwined as they had been for more than 40 years. "You have any regrets?" Victoria asked, a question she had never asked before. Dalton was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. "Not a single one. Every choice I made led me to you, led me to this life. How could I regret any of that?" "I regret what I did to Frank," Victoria admitted. "Not that I defended myself, but that it came to that. I regret that he never changed, never became the man he could have been." "Some people cannot change," Dalton said gently. "You gave him chances, Victoria, more chances than he deserved. What happened was not your fault." "I know," Victoria said. "It took me years to truly believe that, but I know it now, and I am grateful beyond words for everything that came after. For you, for our children, for the life we built. You gave me everything, Dalton. We gave each other everything," he corrected. "That is what partnership means. That is what love means." Victoria smiled, leaning into his warmth one more time. "Tell me again," she said softly. "Tell me what you said that day when I told you I would only bring you shame." Dalton's eyes, still honey-colored though faded with age, found hers with the same intensity they had held in that Lordsburg saloon so many years ago. "Then we will face it side by side," he said, his voice strong despite his years. "And we did, my love. We faced everything side by side and we made it through." "Together," Victoria agreed. "Always together," Dalton confirmed. As the sun set on another perfect New Mexico evening, Victoria Xavier closed her eyes and felt only peace. She had been given a second chance at life, a chance most people never received, and she had used it well. She had loved deeply, worked tirelessly for causes she believed in, raised children who went on to make the world better, and spent more than 40 years with a man who had shown her what true partnership really meant. The shame she feared she would bring had never come to pass, because there was no shame in survival, no shame in choosing yourself, no shame in accepting love when it was freely offered. Instead, there had been only grace, redemption, and a love story that proved that even the darkest beginnings could lead to the brightest endings. Victoria had told the cowboy she would only bring him shame, and he had answered that they would face it side by side. And in facing everything together, through all the years of joy and struggle, triumph and challenge, they had built something that would endure long after they were gone. A legacy of love, courage, and the unshakable belief that no one should have to face their demons alone. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting and watched over every moment since, Victoria Xavier smiled one last time, held tight to the hand of the man who had saved her and allowed her to save herself, and felt completely, utterly at peace. Their children found them the next morning, still sitting on the porch, still holding hands, having passed peacefully in the night within minutes of each other. It was exactly how they would have wanted to go, together until the very end, facing one final journey side by side. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Victoria and Dalton had touched over the years. Women Victoria had helped through the aid society, families who had worked on the ranch, children and grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. The eulogy spoke of their devotion to each other and their community, of the way they had built something beautiful from tragedy, of how their love had been a beacon of hope for everyone who knew them. They were buried together on a hillside overlooking the ranch, beneath a simple stone that read, "Victoria and Dalton Xavier. Beloved parents, grandparents, and partners, they faced everything side by side." And indeed they had, from that first meeting in a dusty Lordsburg saloon to their final breath on a porch they had built with their own hands. Their love story, born from desperation and kindness, had become something extraordinary, a testament to the transformative power of standing beside someone when they need it most, of believing in second chances, and of never, ever giving up on love. The ranch continued for generations. The Women's Aid Society expanded and thrived, and the Xavier family tree grew deep roots in New Mexico soil. But more than buildings or organizations or bloodlines, Victoria and Dalton left behind something more precious. The memory of two people who had found each other in the darkness and created light, who had proven that shame could be transformed into strength, that fear could become courage, and that love, true love, could heal even the deepest wounds. Their story became legend in the area, told and retold by parents to children, by grandparents to grandchildren. The story of the woman who thought she would only bring shame and the cowboy who promised to face it side by side. It became a reminder that no situation is truly hopeless, that kindness matters, that standing up for what is right even when it is hard can change everything. Their legacy lived on not just in the tangible things they left behind, but in the countless lives they touched, the women they helped, the children they raised, the community they built. Every person who escaped an abusive relationship, every child who grew up knowing they were loved, every family that prospered on land worked with honest labor carried forward a piece of Victoria and Dalton's dream. The story of she told the cowboy she would only bring him shame. He answered, "Then we will face it side by side," became more than just their story. It became a testament to the power of human connection, to the way one person's faith in another can change the course of a life, to the beautiful truth that we do not have to face our darkest moments alone, and that love offered freely, without judgment or condition, has the power to transform everything.